How many times has a student or a parent told you that practice didn't happen because there just wasn't time, or they weren't sure what they needed to do, or fill in the blank with any of another million reasons? The key to avoiding practice wars or just outright avoidance is with fun piano practice ideas. Now, don't worry, the ideas I'm going to share, they can be used with more than just piano. You can really use them with any instrument. I'm Rosemarie Penner from the Unfinished Lesson. I help instrument teachers get balance in their life and creativity in their studios because you can have both. So, how do we create the Haagen-Dazs version of practice time so that students want to practice and those practice wars, they never even get started in the first place? So, the key to this is through improvisation. Now, another way we could look at this is through substitution. Now, musicians know all about substitution. I remember at one point I was performing for a women's trio, and the piano that I was about to perform on, one of the keys played 5 pitches, like all at once. Now, the problem was that that particular key was supposed to be played 4 times every single measure, almost every single measure, for the one of the entire songs. I had to kind of substitute very quickly because I only had one playthrough and chance to figure it out before we were performing. We substitute all the time. Now, those ones are performance ones, but here's the thing, when we're practicing, we still need a substitute. And honestly, it doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the more simple it is, the better. And you don't even have to call it improvising, even though improvising is really just a form of substitution. So beginner improv ideas, this is where we're going to start. You could look at dynamics. You could do something like opposite dynamics, or you could get students to explore the range of a dynamic. Make it into a game. How much difference can they make between, say, mezzo piano and mezzo forte before you or their parent or sibling can't hear a difference between the two that they're playing? You could have them do tempo changes. So chances are that beginner students aren't going to have a steady tempo until they've really internalized that. What we want to do is get them to do this purposely. Can they play it with a steady tempo this section, but as fast as possible, or as slow as possible? Getting them to explore what different tempos might sound like, especially if it's a slow tempo, really short section. Otherwise, your whole lesson could be listening to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star one time through. You can get off the bench and get moving. This is really great, especially with younger students who really do need a lot of interaction with lesson. If you check above, I have a video that has a bunch of tips, 8 tips in terms of how to do this, mixing the movement and improvisation. You could get them to make a 3-note melody. What you could do if you want to link it to a song that they're playing is just write out the melody rhythm for them of a song that they are going to play or are currently playing, and then give them 3 notes that they can experiment with. You could get them to experiment with hand shape. For example, we usually want students playing with a curved hand. Well, what happens if they play with flat fingers? What happens if they go almost like a claw? And you can just kind of change it up and get them to experiment that way. Usually the curved hand shape feels a lot more comfortable and natural, especially once they've experimented with this. So this one might be one done in just small sections. For some elementary improvisation ideas, you could do a variation of what you did with your beginner students. So instead of dynamics, maybe you do articulation. Again, what does it feel like when you have almost like a super staccato versus a staccato versus portato? So again, focusing on the range of what is possible for each of the articulations. And you don't have to necessarily get into the technical terms of each. That's totally fine. But again, make it into a bit of a game. See if students can trick you. Can you hear the difference between them? You could get them to do pitch changes. So what I mean by this is maybe they play an octave higher or lower. For some students, what you might even want to do is get them to move their hands away from each other so that their right hand is playing an octave higher and their left hand is playing an octave lower. This one's a fun one, and because it's octaves, then really it's just the physical feel. It's not so much the theory part of it. You could get them to write out the rhythm of a section of a song that they are learning, and then get them to improvise with just that rhythm with say the pentatonics, the 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 tones within the scale. You could get them to add chords, whether those are full chords or just chord bridges, to a melody. This usually works fairly good with elementary music because there might be partial chords already in the music. So you could hide those and then go through what those chords could be and just write chord symbols at the top. Or you can change it up and see if other chords work within it. One last idea for elementary level students is to play technique as if it's a song. I would especially encourage this with backing tracks. Yeah, they're playing the notes in order, but let them know they can change the rhythms. Some of the notes might be repeated, some of them might not, some of them might be almost like eighth notes, whereas other ones are quarter notes. Whatever they choose in the moment, it just makes it a lot more fun, and it helps them see the connection between the scales and their music, because there's a lot of scales in music, as well as the scales that they're playing for warm-ups. Yes, I would consider that a form of improvisation because they're going away from what is written down or what was originally intended. So lastly, some intermediate level improvisation ideas. So these are for your more advanced students, getting them to transpose to a different key. So using sequence. So maybe if the song was in the key of G, then moving it up to the key of A. Well, what does that sound like? Another thing you could do is change it from major to minor or vice versa. I used to love doing this as a teen, especially with hymns that I was playing at the time. If I was having a rough day, yeah, hymns tended to be played in a minor key to kind of really let me release the angst from my day. Your students may enjoy doing the same thing. You can do a different accompaniment pattern. So this is really great for helping students be able to not just play what's written, but expand on it, change it, and it'll help them so that as they're playing with other people, hopefully they get the opportunity to do that, then they feel a little more comfortable with that. And the last idea is that oftentimes the music is going to have the chord under the melody. So exploring what inversion is it in, what type of chord is it, and then how can you change it? Do you maybe leave out some of the notes of the chord? Do you change the inversion? Do you try and have a middle voice where the melody is suddenly in the middle of the chord, and then you're trying to keep the outsides of the chord quieter? So that's a really good voicing exercise. It's a difficult one, so I would definitely save that for your much more intermediate students, but you can absolutely do that. We don't want wars happening during the week. That's how students drop lessons. That's how parents go, you know what, this just isn't worth it anymore. So the more fun we can make it, the easier it is. And the more our students want to go play piano or whatever your instrument is during the week. And that's the key. Now, some of these were a little bit more of a song-centric approach, meaning you're starting with a song that your student will be learning or is learning, and then adapting from there. And some of them could be more of a studio-wide approach, meaning that maybe it's more warm-ups. If students are learning particular technique, maybe you have backing tracks that you can use that work for all the different levels. Both approaches work fantastic. I've used both in my studio, and there's really great things that can happen from both of those. I actually think sometimes making sure that you have a mix of both works the best. So I like having a studio theme and something that allows me to have a plan for my entire studio that I can adapt. And then whatever we're learning there, I pull as they're learning their songs and go, remember in our warm-up, remember in lab, we did this. We'll look at what it looks like in your music. So again, just creating a feedback loop for our students and helping them see all those connections. I've linked to an article in the description that has some ideas for resources that include both of these approaches, more of a song-centric approach as well as a studio-wide approach, depending on which way you want to go. Be sure to watch the video, whichever side it's on. In that particular video, I go through 8 tips for including movement and improvisation. Including movement with improvisation helps students internalize a steady tempo and meter, as well as a whole host of other things. Plus, in that video, you'll be able to see in action how I do this in my studio.